I appreciate the opportunity to be here on behalf of TriMet to talk about our digital campaign, what makes this place great. I'll try not to wear you out. I'd like to start with just a question. How many here have heard of TriMet? Okay, all right, well, so I can't make things up as I go along. Darn it. How many of you ride TriMet? Okay, quite a few. How many don't ride TriMet? And it's okay if you don't, because the intent here is that we help, we think, improve the livability of the region. Whether you ride TriMet or not, it's good for all of us, is our hope. How many of you have a generally good impression of TriMet? Pretty good. How many of you have a generally poor impression of TriMet? A few. Okay, all right. Well, this campaign is really for folks like you. So we're going to see what we can do here. Let me just give you a little bit of background. Here's what I assume you probably know about TriMet, that we provide bus service. What you may not know is we have 605 buses that travel through the three-county district, Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas counties. We have 120 Max Light Rail trains, and we run West Commuter Rail from Beaverton to Wilsonville. We also have paratransit service to provide service to the elderly and disabled, and it's a service we call Lyft, and it's door-to-door on-demand service. So those are the kinds of things that we provide in this region in terms of transit. So some things you may not know. And I'll make my point here, but I just want to share a few things you may not know about TriMet. That transit's growing faster than car trips in the region. In a recent 10-year period, transit increased about 45% versus about 15% for vehicle miles traveled via auto. We're ranked 7th in terms of transit in the region, but we're 24th in population. So we provide more transit per capita and in absolute numbers than nearly all cities our size and some larger cities. We provide more service on the weekends than most agencies across the country. And in fact, cities like Denver and Houston, San Jose, Sacramento, Dallas, we have at least double the weekend ridership of those cities. And that speaks to the value that hopefully folks have in using transit to get to their favorite recreational venues and activities. And we've also, the region's invested about $10 billion in economic development since we opened light rail back in 1986. Every day we provide about 315,000 rides, or about 100 million rides a year. By way of our buses and trains out on the roads and our tracks, 52 miles of tracks, we eliminate about 205,000 car trips a day. And as you can see, there's some environmental benefits as well as some congestion mitigation by way of our trains running on the Sunset Corridor and on the Bamfield during commuter hours. Also, and some of you may have seen some of this, but the Portland region, with TriMet, if you will, sort of the elephant in the living room on some of these things, ranks number one, or has ranked number one in a variety of different categories, including most recently by Sunset Magazine as the best place to ditch your car. And of course, the import of that means that there's other alternatives. We'd like to think we're one of those. Additionally, and here's some information you may not know. We do an annual study of the region every year of adults in the region. And last December, when we conducted this study, we learned that 71% of the general public approve of the job TriMet's doing. A couple of years ago, there was a survey of the Oregon legislature, and I think the number was like 26%. So all things considered, that's a pretty good number. So we feel pretty good about that. A really, truly absurd number is the fact that 80% of all adults in the region rode TriMet at least once last year. I say that's absurd because that really is a market share number, and it translates to, for folks who ride us more than a couple times a month, that number is about 43%. But of adults who have ridden us in the last year, 80% is a pretty big number. So people have had experience with us. 83% of our riders are satisfied with their service. And I think the difference between that 83 and that 71 speaks to the fact that when you experience TriMet, you generally are going to have a better perception of us. The number that's probably most absurd up here is the fact that 84% of our riders are what we call choice riders. And that means that folks either have a car, but they choose transit, or they choose not to own a car because they prefer transit. What's important about that number for us is it means that because folks like you have a choice, we have a responsibility to provide you the kinds of services and amenities and tools that cause us to be your choice, because you can go do something else. This number is the inverse in other markets, some other markets in the US. So it's a number that sort of really puts top of mind for us the phrase, "What have you done for me lately?" So it raises the bar in terms of our responsibility to perform. So these are all pretty good things. In addition, when we asked the question in that same survey about safety, riding a bus and riding Max come in second only to walking in your neighborhood. So all things considered, we think that's a pretty good showing as well. We would expect people to feel safer walking in their neighborhood. All of this, by the way, the survey last year was in the context of a landscape where it resembles a Pepperidge Farm fish cracker. And the reason it does is because you can see there's a precipitous drop in terms of the percentage of folks who thought the region was going in the right direction. That number dropped quite a bit from the prior year. And then those folks that thought we were going in the wrong direction, that number increased. So that made for a fairly convenient depiction of the fish. So with that, you might conclude that all things considered, TriMet's fairly well regarded in terms of connecting people and communities and being a part of the livability of this region. And so, you know, in terms of my role as the marketing director, you know, my work's done. You know, I don't even, you could even ask the question, why am I even here today to talk about this? Well, unfortunately, there's other things that you may have heard. For some of you who raised your hand and suggested that maybe TriMet wasn't your go-to, some of that could be because you've seen some of these headlines. And they may look familiar. I'm painfully aware of these because it doesn't matter what day of the week or what week of the month, you're going to see a headline like this in the media with regard to TriMet. And even, you know, images like this, which if it weren't for the content is kind of cute. So what does this mean? Well, first of all, we think it means that we're relevant. You know, I'm trying to, you know, the glass is, you know, half full. I tell my team every day that what this means is that we matter. That if we didn't matter, people wouldn't bother, you know, putting information or news up about us. So that's the good news. The bad news is, of course, it means that there's it creates some perceptions out there. And for those that don't ride TriMet especially, perception, you know, of course, is reality. And in this case, it becomes a proxy for the experience of riding. And so you see this, and you might imagine that TriMet's got, you know, its fair share of problems. So that creates the opportunity for us to do something about that. So we got together with our branding partners. Some of you may know Dennis Hahn and his team from ID Branding, now with Liquid. And we put together a campaign called What Makes This Place Great. And the premise was that the fact that there's a challenging economic environment that we're all so painfully aware of, and the fact that the media puts information out that doesn't always put us in the most favorable light, combined with the fact that TriMet's communication strategy has typically been what I'll call reactive. And another way of saying that is that we play whack-a-mole. If you've ever played whack-a-mole, you know, the minute you whack the one, another one pops up and you keep doing it. And that's by way of us recognizing that we have a responsibility to respond to media when there's an issue or a problem or an opportunity. And so we find ourselves in a position of defending a fair amount. And by the way, just so you know, we have great regard for the media because they have a responsibility to hold us accountable. And so we understand that and appreciate that, but we also think that you know, in the spirit of if we don't control the message, someone else is controlling it for us, we have a responsibility to perhaps be a little bit more proactive in terms of sharing some of the things I showed you earlier on that are more positive virtues about what we do. And so the challenge is then, so the problem is not everyone sees TriMet as integral to this sense of place, easy for me to say, and some people don't understand how we provide for the greater good of the region. So in terms of a solution, we've created this campaign because we want to find a way for the public to make the connection in terms of the good that TriMet does and to create that visibility in the hopes that people will appreciate that this region wouldn't be this region without TriMet as, you know, part and parcel of that equation that makes us so livable. And so how we do that is the real challenge. We think that as of yet, there hasn't been a single entity that's taken responsibility to be that sort of place where we can reflect everything good about the community, and that we can do that because we're all over the place. You see TriMet all over the region with our buses and trains. And that, so we think there's an opportunity to tell stories about what makes this place great. And the more stories we tell, the more we hope that people will recognize that we all have in common. So our key messages are that this place is great. TriMet provides a contribution to that, and therefore TriMet helps to make this place great. And this campaign, by the way, is intended to use others' voices so that we're not bragging or talking about ourselves, especially to an audience that may not have an affinity to us. And so I guess the best way to describe it is we're going to be fairly subtle about our approach to linking TriMet to these stories. So our goal, of course, is for the entire community to know those three things. So the campaign is about what makes this place great. We'll tell stories about the people, places, and things that make us quirky, unique, special, wonderful. And our tie-in is that's brought to you by TriMet. And we'll demonstrate how we can connect and get people to those places that people value. So here's how the campaign works, just in a nutshell. At the center of the campaign is a website called whatmakesthisplacegreat.com. And if that seems like a mouthful, you can also get there by wmtpg.com. We have a Facebook page to support that. We have a hashtag WMTPG for conversations via Twitter. We have Drive Time Radio, and some of the stations that we'll be targeting include KXL and Kink, and 1080 The Fan, and 105.1 The Buzz. And these wouldn't be necessarily go-to stations for our primary audience, but rather it's an opportunity to get to some other folks, again, to try to bring the message about the good that we do through other stories. We also, lest you think that we're thinking we're wonderful by saying, ooh, transit, although we might think that, we wouldn't say it. That stands for out of home. And so out of home, of course, would be billboards or kiosks or digital signage. In our case, it's external advertising on buses and trains. So because we own the inventory, it's a pretty cost-effective way for us to get the message out. So you'll see our What Makes This Place Great ads on transit. You'll see it in local print, and we'll focus primarily on community newspapers, again, in places like Gresham and Sherwood and Tualatin and Tigard, Hillsborough, to reach folks who might not have, again, that immediate affinity. And then finally, we'll do a variety of community events with our partners to get the word out and encourage folks to participate in the storytelling about what makes this place great. So here's our campaign. It starts with the centerpiece I mentioned, our website, and I'm going to ask that we hyperlink to Zoe in the middle for a 4-minute slideshow to give you an example of the kind of stories that we put on this site as sort of the core group of stories. And then others we'll invite others to tell their stories as well.
When I started the business, I didn't have a plain cheesecake. I didn't think anybody wanted one. And I remember the first time someone asked, "Do you have plain?" And I thought, plain? You know, one bead of sweat coming down. I was like, I could stop and not put anything on it. So now I have plain. When I was in my 20s, I actually started baking. That was when it first happened, when I found out that I could bake. I really loved it. And like a lot of people who love doing it, oh, I have a little business one day. And so I knew that when I moved to Oregon that this was going to be my last move, that I was going to finally settle down. And this was going to be the place that if I started it, it would be here. I knew it was going to be a farmer's market business because I wanted to be a part of that community. So the very first thing I thought of for Zoanne's Cheesecakes was my slogan, which is Certified Decadence. I have to admit, this is probably my best cake, and that's the coconut cream. And that is the one I always tell everybody, my husband cracks the coconuts for it. I was born in Philadelphia, raised in Chicago, but I've been fortunate enough to live in quite a few places. So, you know, I've lived in London, I've lived in New York. I lived in the Bay Area for a number of years, Seattle, Jamaica for 3.5 years, which is my second home. Jamaica is where I met and married my husband, Maurice, and, you know, finally here in Beaverton, which I absolutely love. And so I remember we were driving in the car and we were on Highway 26 and we went under that tunnel. And when you come out of the tunnel and it was all the trees and the mountains, and both of us just kind of exhaled. And so that's how we came to be in Beaverton. And to be honest with you, for the first time, my spirit is resting. You know, people here, you know, they say hi back, and I love that. First thing I always say is that it's a very easy place to live and it's civil. And those are really simple words, but they mean a whole lot. When you've lived in other places, you know what I'm talking about. It's a beautiful place. I love it here.
Thank you. All right, so there's 6 stories that we've curated from folks around the region who have interesting stories like Zoe. And the connection with TriMet is at the end of each story, we ask these folks to identify their favorite places that they like to go. And then we provide a link to our online trip planner. And by the way, we plan about 600,000 trips a month. And so it's an opportunity to create that connection where TriMet can get you to some of these fun places that people talk about. So if you get an opportunity, there's some really fun stories here. And by the way, there's some additional stories where we invite, there's a participate tab that we invite folks to tell their own stories in 300 words or less, download up to 8 different photos, and then tell us about their favorite places. And so you are all welcome. We would love it if you would care to share your stories about what makes this place great. And again, we're going to plan on this campaign running about 2 years, so there's lots of time. So if you don't get to it today, you got lots of time. So we'd love that. Additionally, we'll have print ads, as I mentioned. It'll feature Zoe and the other folks who tell their stories with a QR code that takes people to the digital content. And we will have transit ads, as I mentioned earlier. And the transit ads will feature a combination of people and their stories, places. And by the way, these are venues and events that we work with. We mocked these up for this particular campaign. But these are examples of the kinds of places that we would promote in terms of the things that make our Portland region so wonderful. And then things. We've already promoted the 25-year anniversary of Max Light Rail in the region, the 10-year anniversary of the first train from an airport on the West Coast with the Red Line. You'll see ads out there for the upcoming Portland-Milwaukee Light Rail, which is scheduled to open in 2016. We're already working on the bridge, building the cofferdams, protecting the fish. And then we also have a partnership, and I think the gentleman from Marquetta will be speaking later this afternoon, but it's a partnership that provides rewards to our riders, just for being riders, to use this Marquetta card at their favorite merchants in the Portland area. So it's a multi-merchant card promotion. And so we also will support this campaign with radio. And I've got a 60-second spot I just wanted to play for you so you can get a flavor of how this will sound.
We grow everything from asparagus to zucchinis. We have beets and carrots and fava beans and green beans and shell beans.
The sunset is the best time to be at Overlook Park. The view from there is amazing.
And we go into the zucchinis and several varieties of tomatoes, bell peppers, sweet peppers, hot peppers.
I live at the Tualatin View Apartments right on the Tualatin River. Keep my float tube on the deck, basically just pick it up, walk out the front door, and cut right through the woods and drop down to the river's edge.
We have fall-bearing raspberries, we have Marion berries, we have boysenberries.
On the scale of awesomeness, the Portland region ranks pretty high. So what do you think are the people, places, and things that make this place great? Visit the website, whamakesthisplacegreat.com, to share your story. We'd like to hear from you. Brought to you by TriMet.
Geez, I think that's about it.
So that kind of gives you a flavor of what the radio spots sound like. And then additionally, I mentioned we have a Facebook page, a hashtag WMTPG for Twitter conversations. We have digital information displays along the mall downtown. Perhaps some of you use that. Typically, it provides real-time arrival information along with service updates on a feed at the scrolls on the bottom. We'll also be rotating messages that include what makes this place great on those displays, and they'll also be on our digital information displays around the MAX system. I mentioned we'll do community events. We've got pop-up tents and leave-behind cards that encourage folks at various community events to tell their friends and family to share their stories about what makes this place great and how they can do it on the website. We've sent and continue to send email prompts that have a hyperlink to the website to encourage our partners, venues, and events and attractions to participate in, again, sharing their stories on what makes this place great. Now, the intent of this is to be evocative of the wonderful things about the region and appeal to the emotional side of folks' brains. And yet, we also recognize there's an opportunity to appeal to the rational thinkers, the so-called left brain. And so we will have a campaign that will piggyback with this and run parallel with it, probably starting in the spring, that we're calling the Big Picture. The intent of this campaign is to identify data in the form of information graphics, so hopefully it's palatable, such that it describes TriMet's performance in a variety of areas, from fuel efficiency to environmental benefits to ridership, cost containment. And the idea here is to appeal to that group that really appreciates the numbers. And hopefully there's some aha that's created here for those people that aren't taken with the emotional approach. So these are mock-ups, but this is an example of demonstrating how we compare with ridership with other cities around the country. Here's an example of gas mileage with regard to folks on a TriMet bus versus being in a single occupancy vehicle. This one is still a work in progress, but the intent here is to demonstrate congestion mitigation. And then I don't expect you to see that, but this will reside ultimately on the TriMet website on its own set of pages called The Big Picture. And then lest you thought we forgot about our riders, we do have, again, another parallel campaign that engages our riders, and it's called How We Roll. And so we've created slideshows that we put on our Facebook pages, on our TriMet website, with, again, links from Twitter and on Flickr, so that we go around the region to different locations. And for our riders who are so inclined, we do a photo shoot where they identify, they ride TriMet, this is how I roll, and it demonstrates the broad and diverse audience that represents our ridership. We support this with an online store where folks can get TriMet gear with various slogans and logos and other information about TriMet on mugs and t-shirts and hats and sweatshirts and bags. And so all of this combines to hopefully create a takeaway that TriMet helps make this region a better place to live. So thank you.
All right. So I got a couple of questions here from Twitter. So has the social media been effective in addressing perceptions about your service? And have you done an ROI analysis on the campaign?
The campaign launched, we did a soft launch towards the end of September, and we will do an ROI analysis, and we'll look at quantitative as well as qualitative data. We haven't done that as of yet because we're just really getting out of the gate with it. On the social media side, TriMet's participated in social media for a couple of years now. And one of the challenges we have is, as a public agency, some of you might recall some flack that Multnomah County got a few years back for hiring someone to be dedicated to social media. They kind of, backtracked on that, and they assigned someone else in their communications group to do that. TriMet has kind of taken that approach, and one of the challenges is you get to a threshold where you have to decide if you're going to be authentic in social media channels, you better participate in a way that the channels expect you to, with back and forth conversation. It's sometimes hard for us to do that as a public agency with limited resources, and so we're at that threshold where we really have an opportunity to decide, that we're all in, or we take a different approach. But one of the good things about social media for us is it has given us an opportunity to, when certain issues come up, and they come up over and over and over again, we get an opportunity to dive in and have a conversation that might shed some new light. And it's not perfect, but it's a more authentic opportunity than a unilateral kind of, pushing it out there and being done with it.
Another question I have here is, does TriMet have a Google Plus strategy in addition to Twitter and Facebook?
We don't at this point. We do have a relationship with Google. We were the first transit agency in the country that partnered with Google to create Google Transit by way of our open source data. And now Google has agencies from around the world participating in their Google Transit trip planning site. So with that relationship, we'll be pursuing those kinds of things.
How many people have so going to this customer service, or going to the stories about the thing, how many people have shared their stories so far? And is there any incentives to drive more participation?
We haven't, we've considered incentives, and we're still trying to figure out what's the best way to approach that. We're all ears if you have ideas. Again, one of our challenges, you know, I do this a lot, because on the one hand, incentives would encourage folks to participate. On the other hand, as a public agency, we have a responsibility to be thoughtful as stewards of public funds. So to date, we have about half a dozen people who have participated with stories. As I say, it's been a fairly soft launch. We look to ratchet that up, and it might include some incentives. So we're open to that.
So there have been a number of questions as well, kind of in and around the kind of customer service and how you might have plans or how interactions with customers are going to be handled in the social spaces. Is there any sort of guidelines or specifics that you guys are following to try to interact?
Well, our guidelines right now, again, don't quite line up with the expectations, for example, with Twitter specifically. And that is, right now our approach is that we will provide information and respond to service issues, because a good percentage of the folks that communicate with us via Twitter in particular have to do with where's my train, where's my bus, I've been standing here, when am I going to get some information about what's going on? And so then we work with our operations folks, we meaning the communication folks, to get information out of our rail control and bus dispatch centers to find out what might be going on in terms of if there's a disruption, if there's a mechanical issue, or what it might be. And then our intent is to tweet that out to the Twitter community. When there's a customer service complaint or a specific issue, our formal channel is through our customer service department at 238-RIDE or comments@trimet.org. So we direct people to that. And the reason we do it is because it's a channel that allows us to put it into a customer information system, so we track and report the complaint, and we can also monitor it in terms of the follow-up by the department that's responsible for acting on it.
All right, I want to say thank you, Drew, for coming out and sharing with us.
Thank you.